right, everyone. Like I said, we'll just go ahead and get started again. Thank you. Welcome for being here. Let me turn the music off so that you'll have to bear with us. We're a small but mighty team trying to do everything all at once. So, okay. All right. Yes. Okay. Again, welcome wherever you're located. Hope you're enjoying either breakfast or lunch or a snack. Again, we're having our conversation in our Slack community. That's a member benefit for our members. Again, I'm Kalisha Bass. I am the membership manager here at Civil Eats. If you've been here with us for a few years or even just for a few days, it's just a good reminder to share who we are. We at Civil Eats are a nonprofit daily news source about the American food system, and we are celebrating our 15th anniversary this year with salons like these and more. We value your presence and your participation, and we want you to get the most out of our time together today. Part of our goal with the membership is to create a community. So in addition to receiving our weekly newsletters and access to all of our content, members receive our members only newsletter called The Deep Dish, which came out yesterday and was purposely set to complement the salon. So hopefully you're able to get that yesterday and kind of read through that because that'll kind of inform today's conversation. And then one other benefit is that members have access to our Slack community, which I mentioned we'll be having our conversation over there during the salon and then afterwards with both of our guests. Like I mentioned, the deep dish went out yesterday. It's full of practical tips for home cooking. And today we're going to hear from our senior staff reporter and contributing editor, Lisa Held, who will interview our two expert chefs about home cooking, Kim O'Donnell and Bryant Terry. And again, if you can join our Slack community to start just getting the conversation going, we'll be over there and also here, but I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Kalisha. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited for this conversation today. As Kalisha said, I'm Lisa Held. I'm Civil Eats senior staff reporter and contributing editor. As members, you've likely read one of my stories. They tend to be in-depth and complex on issues like Farm Bill policy, agriculture and the climate crisis, or the implications of concentrated corporate power in the food system. And given all of those important issues that we cover, you may be wondering why we chose to tackle a topic like home cooking in this month's Deep Dish and in this salon. And so in preparing for this, I was thinking about that question a lot, and it made me think of a quote from Wendell Berry, which I know is a little cliched to quote him because he just is constantly quoted in this world, but I'm going to do it anyway. So he said, eaters must understand that eating takes place inescapably in the world, that it is inescapably an agricultural act, and that how we eat determines to a considerable extent how the world is used. So if and how we cook determines to a considerable extent how we eat. So my thought was, unless you're a farmer or a butcher or have some other direct role within the supply chain, cooking is likely the bridge that connects you to the food system. And it's also about culture and heritage and connection and so many other things. So we're going to get into all of that right now with two incredible experts. I'm going to introduce them with extremely abridged bios because they both have done so much, and I don't want to take up too much time, and I want to get into the conversation. So first we have Bryant Terry, who is a multidisciplinary artist, publisher, and author of 6 highly acclaimed cookbooks, including his latest project, Black Food, which won the Art of Eating Prize. Welcome, Bryant. There he is.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Great to have you. And then we also have Kim O'Donnell, who's a chef, journalist, and teacher. Formerly of the Washington Post, Kim is the author of 3 cookbooks, including PNW Veg, 100 vegetable recipes inspired by the local bounty of the Pacific Northwest. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, welcome and welcome to all of you.
All right, so we're all here. And just I'm going to jump right in, but just a reminder, as Kalisha mentioned, during this conversation, you can submit questions via Slack throughout the conversation, and I'll try to work them in when I can. And then we'll also be opening it up to live questions towards the end of the conversation. So let's jump in. Kim, I want to start with you. We called this salon Revitalizing Home Cooking, which I think implies people should be cooking in a way, right? And I know you agree with that. Why do you think home cooking matters?
I was thinking about that question just before the hour got started, and there are a couple of things that come to mind right away. One thing is that, when you're talking about this, the agricultural act, we can talk about the tangible things like you're eating your garden or you're eating from somebody's farm. But I love how when we cook, we eat, we sort of like cross the human experience. We eat history. We eat a place. We eat a moment in time or a season. We eat terroir. We eat culture. We eat heritage. We eat memories. And those things constantly are interwoven. And it may be one thing, or it may be many things happening all at the same time. The other piece for me that really speaks to my heart is that when we cook, we participate. We are active. So I know, Lisa, when you and I talked in preparation for this interview, I told you about sort of like when we are going out in the world and being cooked for, or we're lining up to get food, it's more of a passive experience. We are being fed, which is lovely, but it is more like we're opening our mouth like the baby bird. And when we cook, we are in the experience with the ingredients, with the tools, with the sounds, and with all these other pieces that I just talked about. So that's why it speaks to me all the time.
Yeah, and that idea of action is actually something, Bryant, that you talk about too, kind of this active nature of cooking. And you even kind of take it maybe even further and call cooking a political and even radical act in today's world. For a lot of us, I think it feels more mundane than that a lot of the time. So talk a little bit about why you consider it to be so powerful, cooking for ourselves.
Sure. Well, I think first of all, I'll start by saying that, for more than 2 decades, my work has been aimed at ensuring that, the people living on the margins, the people who have the least access to healthy, fresh, affordable, and culturally appropriate food are afforded this human right to, good food, clean water, clean air, all these things that, we all deserve. And because I started working with young people when I began this work in New York City back in 2001, I am very aware that sometimes starting with the heady intellectual ideas around food or starting with the politics of food can be off-putting, or it can, kind of create this barrier between, people who understand the intricacies of our food system and the kind of structural changes that need to take place to ensure that we're all afforded these human rights and actually connecting with everyday eaters. And what I found is that one of the most powerful ways to engage, just regular people and help them feel like, or I should say, a great way to kind of like bring people into conversation is gathering at the table. When my first book, which I co-authored with Anna LaPay in 2006, Grub, Ideas for an Urban Organic Kitchen, it was at that time, we really thought what we were doing was pretty groundbreaking, kind of bringing together a lot of the heady intellectual ideas around the food system with some practical tips and tools that one can take in both their personal life, in their community, but also keeping one eye on how we can affect policy change. But then, including recipes, really giving someone, we really wanted to provide people with just like an immediate thing that they could do. And what could that be? That can be going to the farmer's market, that could be bringing that food home, or, just whatever, connecting with a local grower, bringing the food home, making a meal, and then gathering with friends and family. And so we started what we called grub parties back in Brooklyn around 2004 when we were working on the book. And the aim of those parties was to bring together our diverse set of, really smart and well-educated and, cool, hip friends in Brooklyn who weren't thinking about issues related to health food and farming, who, generally understood that, yeah, I shouldn't be eating junk food every day, but they didn't understand the intricacies of what was taking place in our food system. And we wanted to gather in this kind of, loving and just communal way. It was first and foremost about building community. And we also aim to use that as an opportunity to educate people about, all things food system. And that has really guided my philosophy since then. I don't really use this mantra anymore, but for a while I had this kind of succinct way of encapsulating the way that I think about food system change. And it was start with the visceral to ignite the cerebral and end with the political. And it's really about using these kind of everyday acts of resistance, as I like to, call them, growing food at home, making meals from scratch, gathering around the table, and seeing the value in those, and seeing that they're not only political, but dare I say, radical reactive resistance in the face of a food system controlled by, a handful of multinational corporations. But then that's such a powerful way that, I've seen over the years to bridge, people actually going into action and making change in their lives, their communities, and on the policy level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that all kind of speaks to why we're having this conversation in the first place, right? Because we're really connecting these kind of heady intellectual ideas about the food system and the political things we cover and all of this to this more visceral, more simple act, right? Of like, what am I going to buy? How am I going to cook it? Like, what do I have in the fridge right now? So yeah, let's get into that process. And kind of go through these different steps and get a little practical, and we can kind of obviously come back to the intellectual at any point throughout. But I want to talk a little bit about shopping, which is, what we have to do before we even get into the kitchen and start cooking. Kim, I think you gave your students guidance about how to shop for great ingredients and stock their pantry. Can you talk a little bit about like the big things you tell people in terms of how to shop for success?
Oh, I think that there's no one size fits all, right? Like, I think but it is about, I think there's an organizational piece to it, and then there's also being realistic, right? So if we are shopping, then maybe we need to know, like, what are we committing to in a given week? Are we gonna commit to 1 day a week? Or are we thinking we're gonna cook 3 times a week? Like, what, I feel like, because food is so accessible to, I mean, it's accessible to certain folks, and then it's not accessible to other folks, and then other folks may be going to a food bank and it's on a certain day, and it just depends. But what I would say is, if you have the means to go and shop whenever you want, maybe be thinking before you go shopping, what does your week look like? And if it means that you're only going to do that 1 day a week, and this is no judgment, but then thinking about maybe even taking inventory of what you've got at home. Like, I think that the most food waste sort of occurs with fresh items, right? So we've all been there with, the greens that have turned sludge in the crisper, right? And, the things that we can do when we get home is like remove those twist tie thingies and dry things so that they don't become a science project. I think that there's a piece about like the kinds of things to have on hand, but also this sort of, okay, getting into a little bit more of how is cooking fitting into my life, or what is my goal? And I'm not trying to sort of dance around this idea, but when I go, either one of us is going to go shopping, I'm looking at what grains I have in the cabinet, what beans, what legumes I've got going on. Do I need any greens or onions, or and I'm looking at what protein I might want to have. Do I want to have eggs? Do I want to have tofu? Do we have fish? But I'm not that kind of person. That I'm not a big box store person, so I'm not doing that giant shop. I know that that works for other folks, but I think no matter where you are shopping, it might be worth a few minutes before heading out the door to even know like what you've got going on before you know. I mean, before you start spending money.
Right, just like yeah, kind of planning even before before you head out. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Brian, I know that you're a big fan of bulk foods. What do you like about bulk shopping?
Well, similar to Kim, I tend to stay away from just the kind of these big whatever Costco's and all that, not to name whatever. But and I do recognize that that comes from a certain level of privilege. I know that a lot of people are working throughout the week, and everything needs to happen on Saturday and Sunday, and so they're just going in, getting what's available or what they need, and then making life work. So I want to put that into context and recognize that. And um I think for me, they're like the larger philosophical ways in which I like to think about how we take care of ourselves. Um, you know, there's always the kind of issue that immediately comes up around cost. People are looking to buy things more cheaply, and oftentimes that means more industrial products. Oftentimes that may mean buying things that aren't necessarily organic, or people imagine that even going to the farmer's market is cost prohibitive. Um, I want to put this out here, especially because a lot of people, when they're thinking about eating, and it's been exciting to see people more invested in thinking about, okay, the way in which our eating is impacting, the environment or all these larger issues. But a lot of people are thinking about, like, how am I eating to take care of my health, especially as they're aging? What can I eat to ensure that I'm aging gracefully? And what I tell people is that you pay now or you pay later. Like, you can decide to purchase cheaper things now, and get fast foods or products that are more industrial. But we know the negative impact that many of these foods can have on our health. And then later on, we'll see those costs in, our potentially failing health and higher healthcare costs as we're getting older. But that's really philosophical. What does that mean to someone who is working 2 or 3 jobs, on a limited budget, or an older person on a fixed income? So, like, I want to hold both of those things, because I want us to just be aware of the way in which a lot of the food that is cheap is artificially cheap, because these are foods that are being highly subsidized by the government. And this is where I want to encourage people to always keep one eye on policy, because if our elected officials made different choices around where the money is being allocated, then many of the healthier foods, many of the small to mid-sized, farmers who are just like barely hanging on by a string, if we diverted monies to them, then the people who are growing food with integrity, with care for eye towards sustainability, with care for towards community members, then that food could be cheaper. And so that's why I always have to, bring this tension around, like, our kind of personal consumer choices and the larger structural political issues that we have to be aware of, because and I feel like I'm going a little off track, but I'm going to bring it back, I promise. because I do think it's important for people to realize that if you want to change the food system, and I think a lot of people do, a lot of people are becoming more aware of the issues and the impact that we have as consumers. But I think where a lot of people get stuck is thinking that consumer action is enough. Like if we can shop our way out of these problems, and these are structural issues that we have to figure out how to change on a policy level, federal, state, local. But just bringing it back, I think, kind of underscoring the importance of what Kim mentioned, having menu planning, like being very like organized with the way in which you want to kind of like structure a week around eating, shopping strategically, and then like being very like just like kind of disciplined and organized around how you're making meals. And one of the things that I think is just so powerful is recognizing that you don't have to do it alone. Like I think one of the biggest way to overcome many of these barriers is figuring out how can we eat well in community, not just me as an individual, not just me with my nuclear family, but what about other people who are in my larger family or part of my faith community or part of my neighborhood? Yeah, it might be cost prohibitive for you to spend all your money at the farmer's market, but what if you gathered half a dozen of your friends and you all pooled your money and you went to the farmer's market that's local and you all bought things that are in bulk? And many times they'll give you discounts if you say, hey, I want to buy a flat of those heirloom tomatoes. They'll cut you a deal. And so you pool money, everyone buys food in bulk. You go back to someone's house who has like the great chef's kitchen with the Cuisinart and the roast probe on their Viking range and all these things. And then you collectively make food together that you can divvy up among the group. Some things can be frozen, some things you can, have fresh, and you can have a diversity of home cooked meals throughout the week that, I mean, not only are they homemade and ideally fresh and local, you're using fresh, local, sustainable produce, but you're building community. You're getting to know people. And I think in these perilous times, as we're hurtling towards economic and ecological collapse, community is the most important thing that we should be investing in. And so I really want to encourage people to just kind of move away from this capitalist kind of like impulse that we have to do everything individually or with our nuclear family, and creatively think about ways in which we could bring more of our friends, family, and wider community in. But to get back to the bulk question, the reason that I like to buy things in bulk is because, kind of as Kim mentioned, you may have like some things, say you have like, I don't know, a lot of quinoa at home, and you just need to get a little bit of cardamom for, this amazing kind of like South Asian quinoa dish that somebody came up with on the internet. And then rather than buying some, big container of cardamom, if one has like access to a co-op or some type of market that has things in bulk, just get what you need so that you
Yeah.
don't have these spices that are sitting there for the next year and being unused, and they're losing all their punch and flavor. So I know I've kind of put a lot out there, but I'm hoping that those threads around like thinking strategically and kind of planning the way that we're doing our shopping, but also knowing that we don't have to do it alone, and we can do this with people who can, like, what do they say? All many hands make the the load lighter. And I really think that's one of the important things that we have to be embracing, especially as people are dealing with their dollar not going as far with inflation and just tough times. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to make two connections to what you just talked about. One, the idea that like, bulk shopping doesn't necessarily mean buying industrial foods at Costco, right? Like there's this way of shopping in bulk that is kind of the opposite of that. And actually, you're potentially saving more money than doing, going to the big box store. And I wanted to read this comment from a member submitted. Patricia Boson is one of our members, and she submitted this comment I thought was really relevant. She said, I come from a poor background growing up in Puerto Rico. Maybe because of that, we cooked everything from scratch. And although not lavish, we always had a meal that consisted of rice, beans, and some sort of meat or fish and a salad. I come from a family that loved food and cooking. It was natural to help my mom in the kitchen. Once I was on my own, I always found comfort in a simple bowl of rice, some beans, and a fried egg. So it's like, you got the rice, you got the beans, it's simple, right? And that's actually coming from, you know, in her family, it was coming from a place of not having a lot of resources. And I thought that was interesting. And then I also just wanted to make a connection to the collective nature that you brought up of cooking. I thought a lot about that when you mentioned it before. And then in the deep dish, we had Chef Nick Sharma, and he made a similar point. He said, if you can get help from family members or friends, maybe it doesn't even have to be meal prep, putting things away, cleaning up, setting the table, take it, take it. It's like, don't feel like you have to do it on your own. So I think that's actually a theme that has come up throughout these conversations. Um, so let's talk about, so we kind of went through some shopping and got went on other tangents. Let's talk a little bit about the act of like kind of getting in the kitchen and cooking. There's sort of two approaches: using recipes, not using recipes. Kim, you're kind of a fan of like, I start with what's in the fridge. I open the fridge. Can you talk a little bit about why you like that flexibility and like how people can get better at cooking from just what's available?
Well, I think that came from a lot of practice, right? Because and I mean I am a recipe person. I wrote cookbooks for a reason, but I think that once you get more comfortable with a recipe, or other recipe, you know, you've got a collection, you go to things that you can veer off. I am that person that can open the fridge and pull stuff out and make something of it. My husband says he feels like that's magic. Um, is it magic? I don't know. I think it's just practice, right? Like I've been doing it a long time. But I think there's something to be said with like giving yourself permission, right? Like, okay, we haven't thought about what we're having for dinner tonight. We're gonna fry a couple of eggs, and it looks like there's some kale that it looks a little long in the tooth. We better fry, you know, saute that. And do we have any crusty bread in the freezer kind of thing? Like that is dinner. So I think part of it is that giving yourself permission, not, you know, like sort of pushing the performance anxiety to the side and thinking more maybe about simplistic stuff. I mean, what if, you know, I'm even thinking like leftover beans plus you've got lettuce that you just picked up and maybe there's some, I don't know, preserved peppers. I mean, it's that idea of like what's there, and if you started to just line it up and not not beat yourself up about it, you probably have something better than decent. And I think that if we can get out of this mindset, you know, the mastering of perfection, cooking like a chef, but we're in this moment of nourishing ourselves. We might have other mouths to feed. We've got the responsibilities of our day. So like just cut yourself some slack. And then maybe it gets a little, you're just, when you open the fridge at the end of the day, it doesn't feel so daunting. But I don't think it's innate for everybody, and that it is a practice, right? Like you got to just kind of keep going back in there, even if it scares you a little bit. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on
Yeah.
what Kim's saying. And I think, you know, I totally agree that ultimately I think the goal for home cook should be using what's on hand, improvisation, just kind of like figuring out how to put together a simple and nourishing meal without, you know, feeling like you need to run to the market and get stuff every single day. Um, I've always dealt with this tension around knowing that that's the goal, but also understanding the reality that many people in our country aren't, as we mentioned, practicing cooking. And we know that this is the reality because of these larger structural issues around, if people are getting paid a living wage so that they can have one job instead of having culling together, several jobs that pay minimum wage, then that prevents them from having, enough time to, leisurely make meals or go shopping, all these things. And so I'm always keeping an eye, like as we talk about food systems, what are the larger structures that may not necessarily be connected with food, but prevent people from having these healthy relationships with the way that they might be growing, cooking, and eating. But for me, I think cookbooks, that kind of stopgap for me has been cookbooks, really giving people nuts and bolts, tips and
Yeah.
tools, these kind of like the fundamentals of cooking so that they start to feel more comfortable and start to have this more, healthy relationship with, making food from scratch. But I think, and this may run me out of business as someone who writes cookbooks, I think ultimately the goal should be to ditch the cookbook, and not feel like you have to run to a cookbook for every single meal that you make. But even when one is looking at a recipe or a cookbook, I think that it's important to see them as a guide, not, to see them as, sacrosanct, and I have to make everything as written, by the author, the cookbook author, the chef, but knowing that, if the recipe calls for a dark leafy green, say it calls for collards, and you have Swiss chard or you have kale in your front yard garden or your raised bed in the back, then use that. Don't feel like you need to run out and buy that specific dark leafy green when you can easily substitute with what you have on hand. And I think in general, just seeing recipes as a guide has been a powerful way for people to kind of like, as Kim mentioned, to like peek into the pantry, see what might be available and how you can substitute that in order to like kind of, execute the dish or the meal that you're trying to make.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We got a lot of member comments kind of on this, allowing yourself flexibility, or we had a member, Ian McPherson, who said reading recipes to understand methodology is a great way to learn. And that's kind of what you're saying. Look past specific steps and try to understand like why they chose these ingredients and how they're implementing them. And then you get better, right? Step by step. So
And I want to say this is like the method that a lot of cookbook authors use. There are a
right.
lot of recipes that may feel like they're just this kind of new thing that no one has seen before. But as I think many of us know, a lot of recipes, they're just kind of reinventions of things that people have already made. And so what cookbook authors and chefs will often do is they'll take a recipe and like really analyze it and understand it, and then think about ways that you can modify it to bring in your own flavor profiles or your own kind of cultural culinary underpinnings or whatever. So I think it's just like one of those things that, people should get in the habit of, yeah, let me look up this kind of general thing that I want to make and then figure out how I can tweak it to make it work for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have many more questions, but I'm gonna open it up to members. If anyone has a question, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself. Does anyone have a question you'd like to ask? Don't be shy. Don't see any hands right now. I'm just making sure there's so many people I have to go through all the screens. Oh, there we go. Catherine LaFond.
Hi, I was excited about this partly because of how you titled the conversation, which was Home Cooking is a Cornerstone. I loved that word, cornerstone of the sustainable food systems. And I'm just wondering if there's more you might want to say about that.
Sure. Bryant or Kim, one of you want to kick off?
I think I'll go back to the idea that I sort of touched on earlier, which is that when we're cooking, we are more actively participating. And even if we don't even realize that that is what we're doing, right? So like we're doing without knowing that we're doing. It's kind of like when I teach, I love when people are learning and they don't realize that they're learning. And this idea that like you're thinking about your week ahead, and then it's in that moment of time. And so here we are in spring, and then we might know somebody who has nettles in their backyard, and then you're learning how to handle those nettles. And from those nettles, you're gonna make some pesto because you have a friend who has a recipe. And then, oh, I've got some pasta in my fridge, and that might be really good with chickpeas. And all of that, I think, makes for more sustainability, right? So we are learning how to connect these dots without really even knowing it. We're living it. We are in it. And I think that the more of us who are participating and actively, whether or not we're reading the latest climate reports, or we know what a GMO is, when we are cooking, we are part of it. Yeah.
Bryant, do you want to add anything before I go to the next question? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just would add that, and this is, Kim's kind of got at this, but I mean, what's our ultimate goal? Like, we're invested, I think, I imagine that we're all invested in doing this important work around, educating and organizing and creating policy change. Why? Um, obviously there a number of reasons, but I think one of the biggest is that so people can eat well. And,
Yeah.
going back to what I said, just this whole reality that I've seen is that, gathering around the table is such a powerful way to engage people in food politics without it feeling didactic and, finger wagging. So it's kind of like we start with where I hope would want to end. Like the goal of all this stuff that we're doing, I think, is to ensure that every single one of us have the human right to healthy, fresh, affordable, culturally appropriate, nutrient dense, and delicious food that people can access. And what a better way to do that than by starting with actually, eating and cooking, cooking and eating. Yeah.
I would add on to Bryant, if you aren't cooking with community to prepare, to portion out meals, maybe it's about having a potluck, right? So you're going, someone's hosting, and you bring one dish and they have the other dish, and you're pooling your resources that way. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can come. Like a friend recently had us for dinner, and she said, we need more dinner because that's when we talk. And to Brian's point, right? That's when we get into the nitty gritty. And it can all be done at the table.
And
Yeah.
I just want to also say that, I've been talking a lot about these kind of, self-driven, self-organizing ways of building community. So like as Brian, as someone who cares about these issues, am going to put a call out for our friends and family communities. I think it's also important that we are pushing those who are a part of or running institutions in our community to get on board and to be a part of this work as well. And so, you have this church, mosque, synagogue, this faith-based institution that you regularly attend and you're regularly giving your money to, for example. We need to be holding those leaders accountable and saying, there's this industrial kitchen that's in the basement that no one has used for like 2 decades. Why don't we reactivate that? Why don't we, figure out ways to dust off things and, bring in community for cooking classes or, workshops on canning and pickling and preserving or, using it to incubate small food-based businesses. Or why don't we think about that huge swath of just grass that you have in front of the church, mosque, synagogue? Why don't we just rip that up and then put in raised beds or grow food in, in the front or the back of the institution? So I think there are ways in which we need to help these larger institutions and people in our community understand that this is a movement that we should all be invested in. It shouldn't just be the people who are dedicating their lives to research and journalism and activism and the culinary arts who are thinking about this. Every single human being needs to be on board with this movement. And obviously people can't dedicate all their time, but it's such a systemic issue that every little drop in the bucket helps. So if we have the local school helping out, if we have the faith-based institution helping out, if we have like community-based organizations who are like, all hands on deck, I think that's going to move us closer to that tipping point.
Yeah, and we have a great conversation happening on Slack, lots of comments and questions. And there's one question that's actually very specific related to this idea of collective action. Cindy is asking, I'm interested in mechanisms by which home gardeners can cooperate with each other to share what they grow or make cooperative choices. I've inherited an online group of neighborhood gardeners, and I'd love to facilitate something along these lines, but I'm out of my depths. Do you know of any projects like this and how they work? Bryant, do you have any specific tips for her?
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not really abreast of like a lot of the current work that's being done around this. And obviously it's going to look different in, different geographic locations and local communities. But I'll say that, give you some examples that I found to be so powerful. And this is in a very specific, this is the Bay Area. And in terms of like, the diversity of food that can be grown and the length of time. So I know that these are very unique circumstances, but there are a lot of neighborhoods in Oakland where I live that are former fruit orchards, like a century ago. And you see this in the diversity of fruits that are being, just kind of people have Meyer lemon trees and, all types of fruit. And so a friend about a decade ago started this foraging project where she was mapping all these different fruit trees around the city, and then people could opt in and actually like, include their neighborhood, cite the tree so that a lot of these things that were kind of just like dropping off the tree and rotting, Asian pears and Meyer lemons and apples and all these things, they were actually, people were open to inviting people to come over and forage and get some of those things. So just having this awareness, and this is just on an informal level. When we first bought our home in Oakland more than, I don't know, 15 years ago, the first thing that my wife and I did was we built a 150 square foot raised bed in the front of our home. And it was both an act of, creating an infrastructure so that we can grow a lot of food for ourselves and we didn't have to go and purchase every single thing. But it also was a political statement. And it was about us saying that like, food, not lawns. Like, why don't we have this culture of growing food in our neighborhood? And some people had backyard gardens, but it was interesting because within like 6 months, there were 4 other people on our street who decided to put raised beds in their front yard as well. And what we started doing was we started like sharing and bartering. So, one of my neighbors, like literally next door, who have this Asian pear tree, they'd bring us a bag of Asian pears, and then we give them like a bag of the kale that we were growing in the front yard. And so, these are just like small examples of the kind of like, local way in which people are just kind of like having this sharing economy around food. But I would say that there are resources of people who have more structured ways of doing that. And, if that's something that you desire, I mean, like, it's not that hard these days to just kind of like create a little website or, some social media platform that connects people, and it could be around connecting, folks to share food. So.
Great. We are running out of time. We're actually a little over, but we have one more hand up. So I'm gonna take Phyllis Rubin, your question, and then we'll move the conversation to Slack after that. Phyllis, if you want to unmute.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
I wanted to interject into the conversation the farmers markets, because I think we've been, from my experience, been kind of talking around them, and that and farmers themselves. And I think that one of the most important ways for people to feel connected to their food and to the food system and to nature in general is to have a relationship, however superficial, with a farmer, to get to know a farmer. And the best place to do that is at a farmer's market. And it is also, as Bryant, I'm sure, is aware of and has written about, speaks to, it is a direct way to subvert the food system, the existing food system, and to purchase directly from the producer. And you generally get a much higher quality product. And if it's an organic producer, you're getting much greater nutrient dense, food. And that leads to cooking, which I kind of posted about before, but it is that, my approach to cooking is just the opposite of what you guys were. Oh, and I'm sorry, backtracking, that farmers market is a really, really, really good place to build community. I work at a farmer's market. I worked for a farm for like 15 years. And I can tell you, this is where this is like the only place where people come, and a lot of people come every single week, and they bump into people and they meet people and they talk while they're waiting in line. And it's just building community in a very positive way around local food and building the local economy. And then I was going to say about, so I would encourage anybody who does not have a farmer's market near you to do whatever you can to try to develop one. And develop a food policy council in your community or your county. So, and then in terms of cooking, I actually approach it just the opposite of kind of how I've been hearing here, is that I go to the farmer's market, I see what's in season, and I buy what's in season. I maintain, as Kim, I believe, mentioned earlier, some basic staples I always make sure to have. But then I decide, once I see what's available, what's in season, then I cook from there. And when I've developed, high quality ingredients, and whether it's produce or, animal-based products, they have a lot of flavor that people are literally unaccustomed to. They are shocked to find that real food grown in living organic soil has immense flavor and is also very beautiful, or animal products from animals that have been grazing on grass grown in real soil, that there's much more flavor and nutrient density, and they actually feel nourished after they eat. And it does not take much at all to make a flavorful, enhancing, wonderful meal. I can't tell you how many times people have eaten at my house and said, this is just so incredible. And it's just simple. You put stuff together in a pan, or you put it's just, when you have flavorful ingredients, you don't have to jump through hoops and brine the turkey for 5 days and deep fry and throw red pepper, hot peppers, and hot sauces on everything to make it have some kind of flavor. It has flavor. So that's the connection. And then one other thing.
I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off because we have to move this to Slack. We're over time. I really appreciate those comments. Thank you so much.
Can I just respond to Phyllis just 2 minutes really quickly?
Sure.
Because thank you for all those comments. Spot on in so many ways. And I totally agree. I think that, I can make all types of arguments around why we should be eating more in alignment with our values, whether it's an eye towards sustainability or, improving the local economy and, many of the issues that we've talked about. But I am very clear that people are self-interested and people want food that's delicious. And so I start there. I'm always telling people to go to the farmer's market because, that fruit, for example, that you get from a local regional farm that's been harvested, that day or a couple days before, it's going to be so much more flavorful than the food that's been, shipped from California and sitting on refrigerated trucks and then sitting in a cooler. And so just starting there, I think, people, as you mentioned, are just like, there was a farmer's market in downtown Memphis, and many of my family members never went there. And I remember I went home for a family reunion and bought this bag of peaches from the downtown farmers market to a family gathering that we had. And people were blown away. And they were talking about how they hadn't had a peach that tasted that good since the ones that, my grandparents were growing in their mini orchard when they were kids. And it's because they've been eating these industrial fruits from the farmer or from the supermarkets that taste like paper. And just based on that kind of self-interest in having more delicious fruits that were reminiscent of things that they grew up with, a lot of my family members started going to the farmers market just based on that. And then obviously all the other benefits, ensuring that the farmers are getting most money from the dollars that we spend and everything. Like, there are all those benefits, but we started with the good food. But let me just say this: go to the farmers market, get to know the farmers, because just because they may not have an organic certification doesn't mean that they aren't producing food with sustainable methods, because oftentimes that certification is cost prohibitive. And the USDA organic standards are so much lower than the ones that California farmers created in the 1990s. It's actually a joke. So who cares about that USDA stuff at the big corporate supermarkets? Go to the farmers market, get the stuff from your farmers, even if it doesn't have organic, because if you talk to them, a lot of times they'll let you know that, yes, we don't have the organic certification, but we're growing with sustainable methods and it's really delicious. Okay.
Yay.
And we have some more questions about farmers markets, including a comment question about constraints, which, even supporters of farmers markets, they certainly have their constraints that we could also talk about for a long time. We're going to move this conversation onto Slack for a few minutes. I'm going to just quickly thank you all so much. Thank you, Bryant. Thank you, Kim, for all of your insights, and to all the members for these great questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Kalisha to just finish us up and explain how we're going to move over to Slack.
Thank you so much. This does conclude our event, but we want to thank Bryant, Kim, Lisa, you all. This was such valuable conversation. And yes, I put in the chat, we're going to move over to our Slack community if you're a member. So we hope that you all will join us there and add any further questions and comments, and then just be on the lookout for the recording and any other resources that we share later on next week. So we hope you all have a great rest of your week and hope to see you over in the Salon channel. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.